Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Torres, and today my speech is titled Concussions in the NFL. The topics I'm going to be going over are how do concussions become a major issue in the NFL, what are some of the long-term effects of multiple concussions, and finally, what type of changes and protocols is the NFL implementing in order to counteract the high number of concussions. Now that I've covered the basics, let's go ahead and get into it. What is a concussion? A concussion is, by definition, a traumatic brain injury. How did concussions become such a major issue in the NFL? I think the reason concussions became such a major issue recently is because of some of the high-profile cases involving ex-NFL players and violence and depression and suicide. For example, ex-San Diego Chargers linebacker Junior Seau committed suicide. Once the autopsy was performed, he was found to have a lot of brain injuries, lingering effects from multiple concussions throughout his career. Second, there's just the sheer facts. Looking into the past 3 seasons of the NFL, there's been over 200 concussions reported per season, and that's only including the concussions that were reported. A lot of these players sustain concussions, and they just go out there and keep playing. Another important fact is 75%. 75% is the number of players which are susceptible to a concussion at least once throughout their career. Obviously, that's an extremely high number. Now, let's go ahead and talk about what are the symptoms of concussions. The symptoms can vary for concussions. Some of the major ones are headaches, dizziness. Some players go ahead and see stars. Also, for major concussions, some players actually go ahead and lose consciousness for a brief moment until they come back to. Now that I've covered some of the basics about concussion, some of the facts, along with some of the facts within the NFL, let's move forward and look at the long-term effects of concussions. Some of the long-term effects of concussions include CTE, which is a degenerative brain disease caused by sustaining multiple concussions. Another long-term effect can be losing mild cognitive function. So some of the things that used to be easy might not come so easily. A lot of players deal with a greater risk for depression. There's also a great risk for suicide if a player sustains multiple concussions over his career. So obviously these are some long-term effects that are important to look at, and that's just the stuff that we've figured out so far. There's still tons of research being done, so we don't really know fully what the long-term effects of a concussion could be. Covering long-term effects, now we want to go ahead and move into the future. What is the NFL doing in order to counteract concussions? Well, first of all, the NFL has implemented concussion protocol, which is a step-by-step way of allowing a player back on the field after sustaining a concussion. Number one, if a player loses consciousness, they will not go back into that game, which is a change from maybe 5 to 10 years ago. A guy loses consciousness, he goes to the bench for a couple minutes, and then he comes back out and plays. That's, I think, the most important rule of the protocol. If a player loses consciousness, he will not be permitted back on the field. Another important issue is if a player sustains a concussion within the season, he will be reevaluated later on throughout that season, even after the initial concussion protocols are met and he's allowed back on the field. This is important because we can gauge, some of the short-term impacts of having a concussion throughout the season. A player gets a concussion, maybe 5 or 6 weeks later, they do a follow-up test, and we can kind of gauge how a concussion can impact a player short-term as well as how it's going to impact him long-term. So these are some of the important concussion changes that the NFL has implemented. And finally, the NFL has also poured tons of money into research. They've paid some institutions to go ahead and take a look into concussions. What are the symptoms? What are the short-term effects? And most importantly, they're focusing on what are the long-term effects of having multiple concussions throughout your career, because they want to be able to give players that retire, the best care moving forward. So, in conclusion, I hope to see the NFL make a lot of important changes so that the players can have a better quality of life after retiring, playing 10 or 15 seasons. So the topics that I covered today were how do concussions become a major issue in the NFL, what are some of the long-term effects from multiple concussions, and what are some of the changes that the NFL is making in order to counteract multiple concussions and concussions in general. So with that being said, I hope the NFL can make some positive changes moving forward, because it is a hefty price to pay for somebody to play, 10 years of professional football, playing a game that they love, and then have to deal with the long-term effects for the next 40. So obviously I hope the NFL can make some positive changes, because obviously the NFL is not going away. It's the most popular sport in the United States. Thank you.